Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Bluetti AC70. This is their newest kind of mid-range unit that is quite affordable, and it is an update to their popular B70S, which was the first Bluetti power station that I actually reviewed. So compared to that unit, the AC70 has a more powerful 1000 watt normal and 2000 watt peak inverter built in. It has a larger capacity battery of 768 watt hours, and it has a lot of other key improvements to the charge capacity, functionality, wireless connectivity, all while dropping the price a little bit. Sounds like a winning combination to me. But let's see how it actually holds up as we dive into the actual handling and performance of the unit itself. So as noted, this is a 768 watt hour lithium iron phosphate battery that is rated for over 3,500 charge cycles to 80%. So that means 10 years of daily full recharge cycles to even bring the battery down to 80% in terms of its capacity to hold a charge. So in other words, this is a unit that theoretically should last for a long time. These units haven't been around long enough, frankly, for me to determine whether that proves to be true, but thus far I will say that the units that I've had and used for several years seem to be holding up just fine. And obviously I'm not charging them on a daily basis, so there shouldn't be that much battery degradation. That is an improvement of 52 watt hours over the B70S, so a little bit larger battery capacity. And then of course, as noted, they've also upped the power of the inverter. So this is a 1000 watt pure sine wave inverter. That's up from 800 watts. And then it has a peak performance, kind of a burst of 2000 watts. And so that's an improvement of 400 watts over the 1600 watts of the B70S. And so as far as the inverter, and we'll get more to some actual tests in a moment of the inverter and how it holds up, but on paper, the specs look pretty good for that, meaning that it could handle a pretty wide range of household appliances and needs that you might have. Now, one area where I just most recently reviewed the AC60, which in theory is a inferior unit to this, and it does have a smaller capacity, it does have a smaller size inverter in it, but it also has some improved specs, leaving you with more of a lateral choice between the two, and I'll try to kind of highlight a few of those choices in between here. But that unit has a much nicer build, a nicer case. It is fully weather sealed with an IP rating. This has no IP rating. That's always to me a bit of a mistake. These units in theory are to help you while you're camping, for example. Well, things get wet outside, and so I think that it would be nice to have seen an IP rating, but obviously there's nothing covering the plugs and the switches here. There is on a few of the outputs and inputs, but for the most part, they're kind of left open to the elements, and so this is not a weather sealed box. So that's a negative there. There is a 5-year warranty, so that's a positive. Means that there's definitely a little bit of security in owning it, knowing that you've got 5 years to discover any kind of flaws that might be there. In terms of the actual casing size, it is 12.4 inches by 8.2 by 10.1 inches, or 314 millimeters by 209.5 millimeters by 255.8 millimeters. It weighs in at about 22.5 pounds or 10.2 kilograms. And so it's heavy, but not inordinately so. You definitely could carry this to a campsite if needed. There is an integrated handle here, and I appreciate the fact that they maintain a flat surface, but I do prefer this other Bluetti design in which you've got an integrated handle that can go down flat and then comes up a little bit higher for holding. Also, this is similar to the AC60's handle. It also has a little bit of padding underneath there, whereas this is just a plastic section. So not quite as nice a handle, though it's functional and it gets the job done. Now, an interesting omission, even compared to the B70S, is that there is no LED light on this anywhere. So obviously that is either a function that they've determined is not getting used all that much, or for some reason it got axed here, but one negative to point to there. A huge positive, however, that the kind of the limiting principle of the B70S was the fact that it did have an external power brick. And so that meant that you were limited in terms of the AC charging by the limitations of those power bricks. And they all have limitations. In this case, it was 200 watts. And so you were not charging any faster than 200 watts. In this case, we have the internalized AC adapter, so no external power brick. And so as a byproduct, you can just plug a simple cord right into that. And so it makes it more portable. So I appreciate that. But more importantly, as we'll look at in just a moment, it vastly improves the potential for charging and also power pass-through. And so it's going to enable it to have a UPS function that the other did not have. The buttons here are responsive. They're not as nice as those on the AC60, which all of those have, they are actually kind of weather sealed buttons, and so they have a little bit more of a substantial feel to them, but everything is responsive in terms of turning on. Some of these units I have to just hold down for a while, and there's no kind of like quick indication. They don't light up, and so you don't know whether they're on or off. That's not the case here. The buttons are responsive, and Bluetti does a great job with their LCD screens. There's lots of information on there. They're clear, they're bright, they're easy to read, so I appreciate that. So as far as the ports that are here, there is, again, a one emission compared to the EB70. There is no charge pad on the top. And so that is something that the previous unit had that this one does not. Again, I don't know if they've determined it doesn't need it, but the AC60 does have one. The AC70 doesn't. So make of that what you will. We have two 120 volt grounded plugs. Those are good for 100 watt total, or that 2000 kind of peak power for brief surges. We have two USB-A ports. These are at 5 volt, 2.4 amps, or 12 watts of output. And then we have two USB-C 100 watt outputs. These have the eMark chip that does some power management and makes sure that it's delivering the right amount of power that your device can actually take. There's some communication, so some good plugs there. Also, we have a 12 volt, 10 amp car outlet plug, and then we have a couple of inputs. So the inputs, we've already noted the AC adapter here on the front. We have our DC and solar input, which is the DC 7909 style input. And the other thing that we have here on the side is that we do have a grounding connector if you want to ground the unit out to make sure if there's any kind of power surging. Now, one interesting thing is that while this is loosely compatible with expansion batteries like this B80 here, unlike the AC70 unit, which has a design that is fully integrated. And so this plug here goes into the side of the expansion battery, locks in there, and then there is a similar plug on the other end that allows information and power to flow freely. And so you never have to, they work essentially as an integrated unit. That's not the case here. And so on one end, I am using this expansion cable, which by the way is a separate accessory. You have to buy this. It's called the XT60. So it does allow me to access this battery backup, but it's just coming into the DC 7909 input there. And so what it ends up functioning is actually just as an alternate power source. And so what it's doing is when I turn this unit on, it will start to charge this, but it does not operate as an integrated power unit. And so as you can see from this video, plugging it in, the overall power output doesn't change, or power capacity doesn't change. And so this is basically just becomes an alternate charging source for this unit. So I mean, that has its use if you're in a place where you have no power. But in many cases, I would actually prefer to get power from other sources. For one thing, it only is charging at right under 200 watts, whereas even from solar, it's easy to get a faster charge than that on this. And so for a couple of reasons, I don't love the integration as well here. I'm glad that it works, but I wouldn't call it a complete integration, at least in the sense of the AC60 and the B80 units. So let's talk about some of the other features beside what is visible here. This does have compatibility with Bluetti's Bluetooth app, and so I always appreciate that. It gives you some expanded control on how the unit functions. I also really like it if I'm out solar charging the unit, because I can check in to see the rate of charge, if I need to maybe come out and adjust the solar panels, or how much longer it's going to need to be out there. But then also it allows me to control the capacity of the unit in a few important ways. One of those is you can make a choice on how you want to charge if you're charging from AC. And so maybe you're wanting a really quiet type charge and you're not in a rush. You can charge on the silent mode, no fans will run, and so it limits the power input to where it can just kind of passively take care of the heat dissipation. And so that charges by my test at 272 watts. The standard charge rate is 442 watts by my test. Fans will come on a little bit, but it's not trying to grab, electrons really fast. And then there's the turbo mode. If you're in a rush and you need to fill it up really fast, you can switch into turbo mode. It's going to be the noisiest, but it's going to pull those electrons as fast as possible. It's rated at 850 watts according to the specs. In my test, it actually pulled 935 watts. And so it can charge really fast through that means. If you're in that turbo mode, you can charge the unit completely in a little over an hour, or you can charge it to 45 minutes, or charge it to 80%, I should say, in just 45 minutes. And so you can really rapid charge the unit. That is a huge advantage over the EB70S, where it had that 200 watt max charging rate. And so in this case, you can charge it more than 4 times as fast. So that's obviously extremely useful. To me, even more useful is the fact that the EB70S was also limited to 200 watts from solar. I prefer to charge these from solar as much as possible because it just kind of feels like a better way of getting, kind of an alternate way to get electricity. And so if I've got solar panels, I want to use them. And so I would be a little frustrated when you have a large capacity battery. It can take quite a while to charge it via solar. In this case, however, we can get either DC or solar input up to 500 watts. And so that means you can charge via solar completely in as little as 2.8 hours, which is a really quick solar recharging time. And so I love that. I also love the fact that you've got a UPS mode available here now. The changeover is 20 milliseconds or less. So it's not the fastest for the changeover, but fast enough that I could hook up a PC and it would during a power off cycle, it would actually keep going on that. And so that's another useful application if you have something that you want to back up and you're afraid of it being damaged during kind of a power outage or something similar. There is a UPS mode now, which is really, really valuable. So as far as the tests that I did, I started off with my 1000 watt blender, kind of the lowest level for an inverter. Kind of it's matched up to that 1000 watts. And so I wanted to see if it could run that. So the initial draw, as you can see, started at 770 watts, and then it dropped into about a 600 watt range. It ran it no problem in just standard mode, no issues at all. My 1100 watt blender, it started at a higher draw, 1135 initial watts that it drew. That's how it handled fine by that up to 2000 watt peak performance. As long as you don't stay in that window too long, it will handle that. And then as the motor, it draws more power as a motor starts up, but then as it levels off, it draws less power and the unit can keep going. So in that case, it started off with 1135 watts and then it dropped to a sustained 850 watts. Again, I didn't have to do anything special. It just ran it no problem. I also noted that I did my smoothie and it was less than 1% battery drain. So, that's pretty great too. If you're kind of off site and you need to have that as a power backup, the fact that you can drain so little of the power to do something like that, which is kind of a power intensive thing, was nice to see. I then switched to my 1500 watt kettle that I typically used. Now I was actually kind of impressed by the fact that it drew nearly 1500 watts and stayed at that. And it actually kept going for 45 seconds, which shows me that the peak mode here, if the draw is not super high, it has the ability to run that for longer than what I've seen before. So with other units like that, I've only seen a few seconds before it overloads. In this case, it went 45 seconds before it, signaled an overload and it stopped, which was enough to get the water, moving along fairly well during that time. This does have the option that Bluetti has through the app of going into something that's called power lift mode. So power lift mode actually throttles back the amount of current that goes out, and depending on the device, there are some devices that do just fine with that. And so in this case, running my kettle, it's 1500 watt typical draw. It ran it at 1015 watts on average, and it was easily able to bring my kettle to boil. That was much more useful than the AC60, which was able to do that, but it limited it at 600 watts of draw, which means it took quite a long time to bring the water to boil, whereas in this case, it was only drawing a little less than usual, and I was able to get the water to boil fairly quick. Now I moved up to an even higher draw thing, in this case an 1875 watt hair dryer. It started trying to draw at about 1700 watts and the battery management system shut it down very quickly due to a high level of overload. I switched to the power lift mode and it ran stable at 955 watts. And so again, you're not getting as much heat out of a blow dryer like that, not quite as much fan speed, but it will actually run it. And that's what the power lift mode is for. I will point, however, that this works better with devices that have a resistive load, like a heating element. It works fine with things like that, but if it's a more complex piece of machinery, like an air conditioner or a refrigerator, you're going to want to be careful with that because you can kind of artificially burn out motors or put artificial extra wear and tear on them, almost like they're running in brownout mode with a reduced power load to them. So I would only resort to that in an absolute emergency. But anyway, it was very useful to have that power lift mode. So it means that I was able to power a pretty wide variety of household devices from the AC70. So in conclusion, let's talk about some things that I like and some things I don't like. I really like the powerful inverter here. That bump up to 1,000 watts and then 2,000 watt peak, it does expand the amount of things that this can run. I really appreciate the fast charge times. It means that I was able to get this back up to charge very quickly, including via solar, my preferred method, made me more likely to use it. I appreciate that it now has a UPS mode, which is a very valuable additional feature on these. And so the integrated power brick, that is a huge thing there. There's a good mix of AC and DC ports here, can do the various things that I want. And Bluetti's app control is nicely executed. It's easy to make those changes, and it does offer up some additional functions for the unit. Some things that I don't like is that obviously the expansion integration is not nearly as good. I don't find it as useful, and in fact, I would prefer to just run this battery down and then charge it via solar because this can charge faster via solar than what the B80 can. The B80 seems to be limited at around 200 watts, and I can't use my most powerful solar panels to charge it, and so it takes longer to charge. So in that case, I'd rather just run this battery down and recharge it via solar. So I don't love that integration as well. I also do wish that it did have the wireless pad. It makes it less useful as a desktop type unit if you wanted to charge some devices right there and just drop it on there. I also wish that it was more weather sealed and had that IP rating. So it was a little bit more versatile for camping and things like that where you're not as worried about it getting wet. I also felt like in general the build quality was inferior to that of the AC60. Now, one final thing in favor of this unit is that it offers a very strong value at 679 Canadian dollars, a little over 500 US dollars. And so it's pretty similar in price to the AC60. Now, kind of a blend of the AC60 and the AC70 would be about perfect. I love the feature set of the AC60 and its integration with the battery expansions. But the superior inverter and the much faster recharge times make me lean towards the AC70 in a practical sense for the way I use it for similar money. And I will say that several years ago, the very first unit of this type that I reviewed was also a 1,000 watt unit from Jackery, the Explorer 1000. And in those few brief years, this unit is far and above that unit in basically every way, from the quality chemistry of the batteries to the recharge times to UPS function, app control, all of those things. They have made a lot of progress in a brief amount of time. And this Bluetti unit still retails for $300 or $400 less than what that Jackery unit did and does at this point. And so I do feel like its value proposition is really high. And so at the end of the day, I wish that it had some of the functionality of the AC60, but it does the important things really well, and so I definitely can recommend it. I'm Dustin Abbott, and there is a link in the description to a little article about this. Also some buying links there if you'd like to purchase one. Right now it happens to be right in the middle of their Black Friday sale, so you can get some advantages there, but there are various sales that come throughout the year, so keep your eye on that. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.